We're all taught that history is a straight line, right? An arrow shooting from the past through today and off into the future. But what if that's all wrong? What if history is actually a giant repeating cosmic cycle? Today, we're diving into this really strange and fascinating idea called the recessional time disc, a theory that tries to map all of human history onto a kind of celestial clock. And this is the fundamental question, isn't it? Is our story just a one-way trip? Or are we living inside a pattern that has repeated for thousands and thousands of years? This model, well, it bets on the circle. So let's see how it's supposed to work. All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll unpack the big idea of history as a circle. Then, we'll try to decode the cosmic clock behind it all. After that, we'll see how it maps onto ancient history and zoom in on a wild case study about China's dynasties. And we'll wrap up with a final cosmic mystery that the theory leaves hanging. Okay, let's get right into it. Section 1, History as a Circle. This is where we meet the central concept, the recessional time disc itself. So the first thing you've got to do is just throw out your mental timeline. This theory claims that everything, we're talking major historical ages, entire civilizations, is all part of a huge repeating pattern. The best way to picture it is like a cosmic clock, where history just moves in this really predictable rhythmic cycle. So if history really is a clock, what makes it tick? How does it work? Let's get into the mechanics and the specific numbers that supposedly build this whole cosmic system. Okay, so the whole thing is anchored to a real astronomical phenomenon. It's called the precession of the equinox. Basically, it's the slow wobble of Earth's axis, and it completes one full cycle every 25,800 years, give or take. The model calls this one cycle a great year, and that's the master clock for one grand cycle of history. Now, to make that huge chunk of time a little easier to grasp, the disk is broken down into 25 equal sectors. You can almost think of them like 25 hours on this giant cosmic clock, and each one of these sectors is supposed to represent a different phase, or I guess you could call it an archetypal energy within the bigger cycle. And if you do the math, it's pretty simple. You take that big 25,800-year cycle, divide it by 25, and you get just over 1,000 years for each sector. So about 1,032 years. And that is the fundamental building block of history in this whole model. Now, this is the most important part for actually reading this map of time. And it's a little weird, a little counterintuitive. It's called recessional time. See, on a normal clock, moving clockwise means you're going forward. But on this disk, moving clockwise means you are receding. You're actually moving backwards into the past. Let's just lock this in, because this rule is everything. If you want to go back and visit the ancient Egyptians, you move clockwise on the dial. If you want to come forward to our time, you move counterclockwise. Got it? That's the logic that unlocks this entire system. So, okay, we've got this abstract clock with its weird rules, but how does it actually connect to the history we all learned about in school? Well, in this section, we're going to see how the model tries to layer real human ages right onto the disk. And here it is in practice. The source material claims that sectors 3 and 4 line up pretty neatly with the Iron Age. Now, if we follow our rule and move clockwise, back in time, we hit sectors 5 and 6. And what do we find there? The Bronze Age. The model keeps this pattern going, mapping even earlier periods like the Mesolithic and the Paleolithic onto very specific sectors farther back on the disk. It really presents history as this series of nested ages. Now for what might be the most fascinating case study in the source material. The author argues that ancient China gives us some of the most powerful evidence for this model, suggesting its legendary dynasties were actually choreographed by the cosmos. So the theory here is that ancient Chinese civilization didn't just casually observe the stars. They built their entire society around them. The author calls this cosmic time. The idea is that each dynasty's right to rule was directly tied to a specific stellar archetype, basically a guiding star or constellation that defined its very purpose and character. This table lays out the specific connections the author is making. So, for example, the Shah dynasty, that's linked to the star Regulus, the heart of the lion, which is said to represent royal power and ascent. Or get this, the Han dynasty, famous for creating this massive bureaucracy, is tied to Spica, a star associated with harvesting and intellect. The model argues that every single dynasty had a very specific cosmic job to do, all dictated by its guiding star. But the theory doesn't just stop with the past. As we get near the end here, things get, well, they get a lot more speculative. We're diving into the most mysterious parts of this framework, ideas that the source itself just kind of leaves as open questions. And yeah, this is where it gets really weird. The author drops this incredibly cryptic quote, claiming that inside one of those 25,800-year cycles, there's only enough room for 13 human reincarnations. What in the world does that mean? It's not really explained, but it's this tantalizing hint at some deeper, more mystical layer to the whole model. And the mystery doesn't stop there. The author also points to the year 1950 as having some profound, though totally unexplained, significance. He also mentions a future effect he calls delayed death, which is supposed to be the conceptual opposite of the recessional time that moves us backward. These ideas are just left there like puzzles, which only adds to the intrigue of the whole system. So, at the end of the day, we're left with this incredibly intricate and, let's be honest, highly speculative map of time. It really does challenge our basic linear view of the past. But maybe more importantly, it leaves us with this huge provocative question. If history really is a map and we can read the past, what does it tell us about where we're all headed next?